The sun was shining bright in a little town. It was one of those days where the sky was blue, the birds were singing, and everything seemed happy. But for two 14-year-old boys, Jamal and Jaden Carter, it didn't feel happy at all. These twins were best friends and brothers. They were black kids who loved playing basketball, telling silly jokes, and dreaming about big things like maybe being famous one day or owning a cool car. To them, life was supposed to be fun and free. But not everyone in this small town saw it that way. Jamal and Jaden were just regular kids. They'd run around the park, dribbling their basketball, laughing so loud you could hear them from down the street. Jamal was super good at making funny faces, and Jaden could tell stories that made everyone giggle. They weren't perfect, they'd argue sometimes, like when Jamal hogged the ball or Jaden ate the last cookie, but they always had each other's backs. They were a team. To their mom, their friends, and their little sister, they were awesome. But to some people in town, they were trouble. And one guy, a judge named Harold Grayson, thought that more than anyone else. Hey, here's a question for you: have you ever been blamed for something you didn't do? Drop it in the comments below, I want to hear your stories. Now, let me tell you about Judge Grayson. He was a tall man with a big, loud voice and a shiny black robe that made him look important. He sat in a courtroom all day, deciding who was good and who was bad. Most people in town were scared of him because he could send you to jail or make you pay money if he didn't like you. And guess what? He really didn't like Jamal and Jaden. He'd see them walking home from school or playing at the park, and his eyes would narrow like a hawk spotting a mouse. He'd mutter under his breath, "Those boys are up to no good." But why didn't he like them? Maybe it was their loud laughs that echoed through the quiet streets. Maybe it was how they didn't look down at the ground when he walked by in his fancy robe. Most kids would get shy or nervous around a judge, but not Jamal and Jaden. They'd just smile and keep going, like he was any other guy. And that bugged him. It bugged him a lot. To Judge Grayson, kids like them didn't belong in his perfect little town. He wanted them to feel small, to know their place. But the twins, they weren't about to let anyone push them down. See, the thing about Jamal and Jaden was they were tough. Not tough like fighting or yelling, but tough inside. They'd grown up hearing stuff like, "Be careful," or "Don't make trouble," because some people judged them before even knowing them. Their mom always told them, "You're smart, you're strong, and you're good. Don't let anyone tell you different." And they believed her. They'd brush off the mean looks and keep doing their thing, playing ball, dreaming big, being themselves. But Judge Grayson? He wasn't letting it go that easy. He was waiting for a chance to catch them, to prove to everyone that he was right about these troublemakers. One day, that chance came, or at least, he thought it did. It all started with something super small, a bike. Not even a fancy bike, just a regular old one with a rusty chain and a wobbly seat. It belonged to a kid named Timmy, who lived in a big house with a huge yard. Timmy was the kind of boy who got whatever he wanted: new toys, new shoes, you name it. One afternoon, he ran to his dad crying, "My bike's gone. I bet those Carter twins took it." His dad didn't even ask questions. He called the police right away, and soon, the whole town was buzzing about it. Jamal and Jaden didn't even know what was happening at first. They'd been at the park all day, shooting hoops and eating sandwiches their mom packed. They didn't see any bike. They didn't touch any bike. But Timmy pointed at them and said, "It was them. I know it." And because Timmy's family was rich and important, people believed him. They didn't need proof. They just looked at the twins and thought, "Yeah, that makes sense." Judge Grayson heard about it and smiled to himself. Finally, he thought, a reason to get those boys. He didn't care if it was true or not. To him, this was his big moment. He told the police, "Bring them to my courtroom. I'll handle this." And just like that, Jamal and Jaden's normal day turned into a nightmare. They were pulled out of their game, told to sit quiet, and dragged to face the judge. Their mom was mad and worried, but she couldn't stop it. The town was already whispering, "Those boys are thieves." When they got to the courtroom, it felt heavy and dark, even with the sun still shining outside. The walls were tall, the chairs were hard, and Judge Grayson sat up high like a king on a throne. He looked down at the twins with a mean little grin, like he'd already decided they were guilty. Jamal and Jaden stood there, side by side, their sneakers squeaking on the shiny floor. They didn't say much yet, but their eyes were sharp. They weren't scared, not yet. They knew something Grayson didn't, something that would change everything. The judge banged his gavel, that big wooden hammer, and said, "Order in the court." Everyone got quiet. He leaned forward, staring at the twins like they were bugs he wanted to squash. "You boys think you can take whatever you want, huh?" he said, his voice booming. "Not in my town. Not while I'm here." The people watching nodded, like they agreed with him. Timmy sat there, smirking, happy to see the twins in trouble. But Jamal and Jaden? They didn't flinch. They just looked at each other, a tiny smile passing between them. Why weren't they scared? What did they know? "Oh, you're going to love this. See, this wasn't just about a bike or a mean judge. This was about something way bigger, something that would flip this whole story upside down." Judge Grayson thought he had them trapped, like fish in a net. He thought he was so smart, so powerful. But he didn't know who he was really messing with. The twins weren't just any kids. They had a secret, a big one, and it was about to come out. The air in that courtroom was thick with trouble brewing. The judge was ready to win. The town was ready to cheer him on. But Jamal and Jaden? They were ready for something else. They weren't going to let this mean old man ruin their lives over a lie. They had a plan, or at least, they had someone who did. And that someone was closer than anyone could guess. So, what do you think so far? This is just the start, and it's already getting wild, right? Stick with me, because this story's about to take off like a rocket. Jamal and Jaden aren't going down without a fight, and Judge Grayson? He's in for the surprise of his life. Ready to find out what happens next? Let's keep going. It all started with a bike. Not a shiny new one, but an old, beat-up bike with a rusty chain and a wobbly seat. It belonged to a rich kid named Timmy, who lived in a big house with a huge yard full of toys. One day, Timmy ran inside crying to his dad, "My bike's gone. I know who took it. It was Jamal and Jaden." He didn't see them take it. He didn't have any proof. No one else saw anything either. But Timmy swore up and down that the twins did it, and in this little town, his word was like gold. Jamal and Jaden didn't even know about the missing bike. They'd been at the park all morning, tossing their basketball back and forth, laughing and eating snacks. They weren't anywhere near Timmy's house. But that didn't matter. Timmy's dad called the police, and the police went straight to Judge Harold Grayson. And Judge Grayson? He was ready to jump on this faster than you can say unfair. See, the judge had been waiting for something like this. He didn't like Jamal and Jaden one bit. To him, they were loud, messy kids who didn't fit in his perfect town. So when he heard about the bike, he didn't ask questions. He didn't care if it was true. He just saw a chance to get them. "Bring those boys to my courtroom," he told the police, his voice hard and mean. "I'll show them who's boss." The twins didn't see it coming. One minute, they were at home, playing a video game and arguing over who got the last juice box. The next minute, the police were at their door. Their mom tried to stop it. "They didn't do anything," she yelled. But the officers just shook their heads and said, "Judge's orders." Jamal and Jaden had to go. They grabbed their sneakers, looked at each other, and followed the police out the door. Their mom's eyes were wet with tears, but the twins stayed quiet. They didn't want her to worry even more. When they got to the courtroom, it was a big, scary place. The walls were tall and brown, the air smelled like old books, and everyone stared at them like they were already bad guys. Judge Grayson sat up high behind his big desk, wearing his black robe like a king. He banged his gavel bam, bam, and shouted, "Order. Sit down." The twins sat on a hard bench, side by side, their hearts beating fast. They didn't know what was going to happen, but they could feel the trouble in the air. "Thieves," the judge barked, pointing at them with a long, bony finger. His voice was loud and mean, dripping with something nasty, like he hated them just for being there. "You two think you can run wild in my town? Stealing bikes? Breaking rules? Not on my watch." His eyes were sharp, and his mouth twisted into a smirk, like he was happy to yell at them. The twins stood there, heads up, trying to look brave. But inside, they were scared. Really scared. The courtroom wasn't quiet anymore. People started whispering all around them. Troublemakers, someone said. No good, another voice hissed. They're always causing problems, a lady in the back muttered. None of it was true, but the words stung like bees. Jamal clenched his fists under the table. Jayden bit his lip. They wanted to shout back, we didn't do it. But they knew no one would listen, not yet. The judge was too busy loving every second of this. He leaned back in his chair, soaking up the whispers like they were music. To him, this was a big win already. Timmy was there too, sitting with his dad. He had a little grin on his face, like he was proud of himself. He didn't care if he was lying. He just wanted the twins in trouble. His dad patted his shoulder, nodding at the judge like they were all on the same team. And maybe they were. In this town, rich kids like Timmy got whatever they wanted, and kids like Jamal and Jayden got blamed for whatever went wrong. It wasn't fair, but it was how things worked, at least, that's what Judge Grayson thought. The judge kept going. I've seen boys like you before, he said, his voice booming. Always up to no good. Well, not anymore. I'm going to teach you a lesson you won't forget. He scribbled something on a paper, like he was already deciding what to do with them. Maybe send them away. Maybe lock them up. Whatever it wasn't good. The twins could feel it. The air felt heavy, like a storm cloud sitting right on top of them. But here's the thing, Jamal and Jayden weren't just tough on the outside, they were smart too. Really smart. Even with all the yelling and mean looks, they didn't break. They didn't cry or beg. They stood there, heads high, watching everything. Jamal's eyes darted around the room, taking it all in. Jayden's hands stayed still, but his mind was racing. They weren't going to let this judge win, not if they could help it. Because they knew something big. Something the judge didn't. Something that could turn this whole mess around. What was it? Oh, it's too good to tell you yet. Let's just say the judge thought he had them trapped, like mice in a cage. He thought he was so clever, so strong. But he didn't know who these twins really were. He didn't know what they had up their sleeves. Every mean word he said, every smirk he gave, was just making them more ready. Ready for what? You'll see soon. The tension kept building. The whispers got louder. Guilty, someone said. Send them away, another voice chimed in. The judge nodded, like he agreed with every word. He loved this, being the big man, making everyone scared of him. He looked at Jamal and Jayden like they were nothing, like they didn't matter. But they did matter. They mattered a lot. And deep down, even if they were scared, they knew it. Their mom was in the back of the room now, watching everything. Her hands were tied together, like she was praying. She wanted to run up and hug her boys, tell them it would be okay. But she couldn't, not yet. The judge wouldn't let her. He was in charge, or so he thought. He kept talking, saying more mean things. You'll learn your place, he growled. This town doesn't need kids like you. But Jamal and Jayden weren't giving up. They weren't just going to sit there and take it. They had a secret, a big, amazing secret. And it was like a light inside them, keeping them strong. The judge could yell all he wanted. The people could whisper. Timmy could smirk. None of it mattered. Because something was coming. Something huge. The courtroom felt like a pot about to boil over. Everyone was waiting for the judge to decide. He lifted his gavel, ready to bang it down and make it official. Any last words? He asked, laughing a little, like he didn't care what they said. But the twins looked at each other. A tiny smile passed between them. They weren't done yet. Not even close. Days went by, slow and heavy, like a storm that wouldn't quit. Jamal and Jayden had to keep going back to the courtroom, over and over again. Each time, it was the same thing, Judge Grayson sitting up high, glaring at them with his mean eyes, acting like he'd already won. The twins sat on a hard bench, their sneakers tapping the floor, listening to people say stuff that wasn't true. They looked guilty, someone would say. I saw them near Timmy's house, another person lied, even though they hadn't. There was no proof, no bike, no pictures, nothing. But in this town, that didn't matter. Judge Grayson didn't need proof. He just needed an excuse. The pressure was piling up, like a big stack of bricks on their shoulders. Every hearing felt worse than the last. The judge kept pushing, making it harder for the twins to stay calm. He'd lean forward, his black robe swishing, and say things like, "You'll learn your lesson, boys. I'm going to fix you." His voice was sharp and nasty, like he enjoyed seeing them squirm. He'd scribble notes on his paper, smirking as he wrote, like he was planning their whole future and it wasn't a good one. "You're trouble," he'd say. "Always have been, always will be." The courtroom was full of people watching, whispering, pointing. "Those Carter boys," they'd mutter. "Stealing from poor Timmy." Timmy sat there every day, his little grin growing bigger, like he was winning a game. His dad nodded along, proud of his son for telling the truth. But it wasn't the truth. It was a big, fat lie. And the twins knew it. Their mom knew it too. She'd sit in the back, her hands twisted together, her face tight with worry. She wanted to yell, "Stop this!" But the judge wouldn't let her talk. He was in charge, or so he thought. But here's the best part, Jamal and Jayden weren't breaking. Nope, not even a little. Even with all the lies and mean words, they didn't cry or give up. They sat there, heads up, eyes sharp, like they were ready for anything. They weren't just tough, they were super smart too. While the judge barked and the people whispered, the twins were doing something else. They were waiting. Watching. Planning. Every single thing the judge said, every sneer he gave, was like throwing sticks on a fire they were about to light. And oh boy, that fire was going to be big. One day, during a break, they sat in a little room away from the courtroom. It was just the two of them, no judge, no whispers. Jamal leaned over and whispered, "He's got no idea what's coming." His voice was quiet, but his eyes were bright, like he was holding a secret too good to tell yet. Jayden grinned, his hand slipping into his pocket. He held onto a little phone, not a fancy one, just a plain old phone with scratched buttons. He didn't say anything, but that grin said it all. They weren't just sitting there taking it, they had something up their sleeves. Something huge. Back in the courtroom, the judge kept going. "I've got evidence," he'd say, holding up papers that didn't prove a thing. "These boys are guilty, and I'll make sure everyone knows it." He'd look at the twins like they were bugs he wanted to squash. "You can't fool me," he sneered. "I know your type." The people nodded, like they believed every word. Timmy's dad even clapped once, like it was a show. But the twins. They didn't flinch. They just watched him, quiet and steady, like lions waiting to pounce. What did they know? "Oh, it's so good, you're going to love this." See, while the judge was busy acting big and mean, the twins were counting the minutes. Every lie he told, every time he banged his gavel, they got a little stronger inside. They weren't scared anymore, not like they were at first. Sure, their hearts still beat fast sometimes, but now it was different. It wasn't fear. It was excitement. They had a secret, and it was like a superpower they hadn't used yet. One afternoon, something small happened, a little hint of what was coming. The judge was yelling again, saying, "You boys think you're so smart, huh? Hiding behind your silly smiles." That's when Jamal looked at Jayden and winked. Just a tiny wink, so fast you'd miss it if you blinked. Jayden nodded back, his hand brushing that phone in his pocket. The judge didn't see it. No one did. But it was there, a little sign that they weren't done. They were building up to something, and it was going to shake this whole courtroom. The days dragged on, slow and tough. The twins had to miss school, miss basketball, miss fun with their friends. Their mom brought them sandwiches and told them, "Hold on, boys. We'll get through this." She didn't know their secret yet, but she trusted them. And they trusted her. They'd sit through the hearings, listening to more lies. "They've stolen before," someone said, even though they hadn't. "They're bad news," another voice chimed in. The judge ate it all up, grinning like a cat with a mouse. "See," he'd say. "Everyone knows what you are." But he was wrong. So wrong. Jamal and Jayden weren't what he thought. They weren't thieves or troublemakers. They were kids with a plan and a big surprise. Every mean word from the judge was like wind blowing on that fire inside them. It didn't put it out, it made it grow. They'd whisper to each other at night, lying in their bunk beds. "He's going to be so mad," Jamal would say, giggling. "He won't know what hit him," Jayden would whisper back, clutching that phone under his pillow. The tension kept climbing, higher and higher. The judge kept stacking the deck, making it look like the twins didn't have a chance. He'd call more people to talk, people who didn't even know them. "I heard they're sneaky," one lady said. "They're always up to something," a man added. None of it was true, but the judge didn't care. He just wanted to win. He wanted to see Jamal and Jayden lose. But losing? That wasn't in their plan. They weren't breaking, they were building. Every day, they got a little closer to their big moment. They'd sit there, quiet and strong, letting the judge think he was in control. But he wasn't. Not really. That phone in Jayden's pocket? It was like a key to a locked door, and they were about to turn it. The courtroom buzzed with noise, whispers, coughs, the judge's loud voice. "You're done, boys," he'd say, banging his gavel. "I'm writing your punishment right now." He thought he had them trapped. He thought he was so smart. But he didn't see the little smiles on their faces. He didn't hear the whispers between them. He didn't know what they knew. What was it? Hang on tight, it's getting so good. The judge was about to find out he'd messed with the wrong kids. Jamal and Jayden weren't just waiting for luck, they were waiting for the perfect time to strike. And when that time came, oh, it was going to be awesome. The fire they'd been building was ready to blaze, and the whole town was going to see it. Ready for the next part? It's going to blow your mind. The big day finally came. It was like the whole story had been building up to this one moment, and boy, was it wild. The courtroom was packed full of people more than ever before. Everyone was there, Timmy and his dad, the whispering townsfolk, the twins' mom, and even some kids from school who'd heard the news. The air felt thick, like fog you could barely see through. Everyone was holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen. The tension was so big, it felt like the room might burst. Judge Grayson sat up high in his fancy chair, his black robe hanging off him like a cape. He leaned back, looking smug and happy, like he'd already won a big prize. His gavel, that big wooden hammer, was in his hand, ready to slam down and make everything official. He'd been waiting for this day, dreaming about it. To him, Jamal and Jayden were just two troublemakers he could finally punish. He thought he had them right where he wanted them, trapped, with no way out. "Anything to say before I decide?" he asked, his voice loud and mocking. He didn't really want them to talk. He just wanted to laugh at them one last time. His lips curled into a mean little smirk, and his eyes sparkled with something nasty. He thought this was it, the moment he'd show everyone he was the boss. The people in the room shifted in their seats, ready to hear him say the twins were guilty. Timmy's dad nodded, and Timmy giggled, thinking they'd won. But then, something amazing happened. Jamal stood up. He didn't shake or look scared. He was cool as ice, like nothing could touch him. His sneakers squeaked on the floor, but his face was calm and steady. He looked right at the judge and said, "Yeah. We'd like to make a call." His voice was clear, not loud, but strong enough that everyone heard it. Jayden sat next to him, grinning just a little, his hand resting on that little phone in his pocket, the one he'd been holding onto all this time. The judge blinked, then laughed. "A call," he said, his voice booming through the room. "To who? Your imaginary lawyer?" He threw his head back, chuckling like it was the funniest joke he'd ever heard. The people in the courtroom laughed too, some of them pointing at the twins like they were silly kids playing a game. "Go ahead," the judge said, waving his hand. "Waste your time. It won't change a thing." He leaned back again, crossing his arms, so sure he was in control. Jamal didn't say another word. He just reached over to Jayden, who pulled out that scratched up little phone. The room got quiet, watching, still giggling a little. Jamal pressed a few buttons, then hit the speaker button so everyone could hear. The phone rang once, twice. Everyone held their breath, wondering who could possibly be on the other end. The judge rolled his eyes, thinking it was nothing. Then, a voice came through. It was deep and loud, like thunder rolling across the sky. "This is Marcus Carter," the voice said, clear as day. "United States Attorney General. I'd like to know why my sons are in your courtroom, Judge Grayson." The whole room froze. It was like time stopped. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The judge's face went white, whiter than a ghost on a snowy day. His mouth dropped open, and his eyes got big, like he couldn't believe what he'd just heard. The gavel slipped from his hand and clattered onto the desk thunk. Papers fell off the table as his shaky hands knocked them over. "Sons," he whispered, so quiet you could barely hear it. "The U.S. Attorney General." People gasped all around the room. Someone dropped a pencil, and it sounded loud in the silence. Timmy's dad stopped nodding, his jaw fell open too. Timmy's grin disappeared, and he sank down in his seat, looking tiny and scared. The twins' mom sat up straighter, her eyes wide but shining with pride. Whispers started flying. "Did he say sons? The Attorney General? That's their dad." And soon the whole place was buzzing like a beehive kicked over. Judge Grayson stammered, I didn't," but he couldn't finish. His words got stuck, tripping over each other. He looked at Jamal and Jaden like he was seeing them for the first time. And you know what? He was. Because these weren't just two kids from a small town. They weren't just boys he could push around. They were the sons of Marcus Carter, one of the most powerful men in the whole country. The U.S. Attorney General was the big boss of all the laws, someone who could make judges like Grayson shake in their boots. And he was their dad. Jamal stood there, still cool and calm, holding the phone. Jaden's grin got bigger, his eyes twinkling like he'd been waiting for this forever. The judge's smirk was gone. His big, mean attitude, poof, vanished like smoke. He'd thought he was the king of this courtroom, but now he looked small, like a kid caught doing something bad. The people who'd been whispering guilty stopped talking. They stared at the twins, then at the judge, then back at the twins, trying to figure out what just happened. That deep voice came through the phone again. "Judge Grayson," it said, slow and strong, "I've been hearing about this case. And I don't like what I hear. You've got some explaining to do." Every word hit like a hammer, and the judge flinched each time. He tried to talk again. "I didn't know, but it was too late. Way too late. The secret was out, and it was bigger than anyone could have guessed. The twins weren't just kids. They were Marcus Carter's kids. Their dad wasn't just some guy, he was a giant in the world of law, someone who could walk into any courtroom and make things right. And he was mad. Really mad. The judge had been picking on his boys, thinking they had no one to fight for them. But he was so wrong. Jamal and Jaden had the best backup ever, and now everyone knew it. The room was chaos. People stood up, shouting questions. Is that really him? Their dad's the Attorney General. What's going to happen now? Papers were everywhere. Someone knocked over a stack, and they flew like leaves in the wind. The judge grabbed his desk, trying to stay steady, but his hands were shaking. His face wasn't white anymore, it was red, like he was hot and embarrassed and scared all at once. Jamal turned off the phone and slipped it back into Jaden's pocket. They didn't need to say anything else. They just stood there, side by side, looking at the judge. Their eyes said it all. "We told you something was coming." And oh boy, it came. The big reveal was like a lightning bolt, lighting up everything. The twins weren't trapped anymore. They weren't scared. They were winning. The judge tried one more time. This doesn't change anything," he said, but his voice was weak, like a squeaky toy. No one believed him. Not even him. The power he'd had. It was gone. The twins had turned the whole game around with one phone call. And the best part? This was just the start. Their dad wasn't done yet, and neither were they. The truth crashed in like a giant wave. Marcus Carter didn't just talk on the phone, he came in person. He was a tall man with a strong voice, wearing a sharp suit that made him look like a superhero. He marched into the courtroom like it was his house, his eyes locked on Judge Grayson. "You picked on my boys," he said, his voice deep and serious. "Now you'll pay for it." Things moved fast after that. People started digging into what the judge had done before. And guess what? They found out Grayson wasn't a good guy. He'd been mean to other kids like Jamal and Jaden for years, blaming them for stuff they didn't do. He thought no one would stop him. But this time, he messed with the wrong family. Marcus Carter wasn't just any dad, he was super powerful, and he wasn't letting this go. The judge lost everything. His job? Gone. His big, fancy title? Taken away. Everyone in town stopped liking him. He wasn't the boss anymore, he was just a guy who got caught being bad. Jamal and Jaden walked out of that courtroom free, their heads held high. They smiled big, feeling strong. Kids who used to ignore them or laugh at them now ran up cheering, saying, "You're awesome." The town learned something big that day: don't mess with the Carters. Jamal and Jaden weren't just kids, they were tough, smart, and had a dad who could fix anything. Justice was served, and it felt so good. The twins were back to playing basketball and joking around, happier than ever. And the judge? He was done for good. The sun was going down, painting the sky orange and pink. Jamal and Jaden stood outside together, watching it set over their little town. They were smiling big, happy smiles that showed how good they felt. They didn't just win a fight in the courtroom. They showed everyone what they're really made of. They weren't just two kids who got in trouble. They were brave, smart, and strong, stronger than anyone thought. And now the whole world knew it. Think about it, sometimes, the people everyone looks down on, the ones they call weak or silly, are the ones who can change everything. Jamal and Jaden were like that. People judged them fast, thinking they were just loud kids who didn't matter. But those two boys had power inside them, power to stand up, power to fight back, power to win. They didn't let the mean words or the judge's gavel stop them. They kept going, and they proved everyone wrong. That's pretty cool, right? And what about the people who judge too quick? Like Judge Grayson? They're the ones who fall the hardest. He thought he was so big, sitting up high, yelling at the twins. He thought he could push them down and no one would care. But he was wrong, super wrong. When the truth came out, he didn't just lose his job. He lost everything he cared about. His fancy robe didn't help him. His loud voice didn't save him. He fell hard because he didn't see the twins for who they really were. That's a big lesson for all of us. You never know who someone really is. Maybe the quiet kid in class, the one who doesn't talk much, has a huge dream or a big secret. Maybe the person everyone laughs at is the one who's going to do something amazing someday. Jamal and Jaden showed us that. They were underestimated, people thought they were nothing special. But they surprised everyone, and they came out on top. So, what do you think? I want to hear from you. Have you ever underestimated someone who turned out to be awesome? Maybe a friend, a brother, or even yourself. Drop it in the comments below. I love reading your stories. This tale about the twins is just one adventure, but there's so much more to come. Stick around, because I've got more stories that'll keep you guessing, make you cheer, and maybe even make you think a little. Life's funny like that. Sometimes the smallest people have the biggest hearts. Sometimes the ones who seem weak are the strongest of all. Jamal and Jaden taught us that, and it's something we can all remember. Next time you see someone getting picked on or ignored, think about the twins. Maybe they've got a surprise up their sleeve too. And maybe, just maybe, you can be the one to cheer them on. Let's keep watching, keep learning, and keep believing in the underdogs, because they might just change the world.